On October 5th, 2011, the headlines began to pour in, and the world was taken by storm.
Steve Jobs, a rebel and icon, dead at 56.
Jobs was 56 years old.
Steve Jobs has passed away after a battle
of a man who literally changed the way we live our lives every day.
However, the headlines and stories all alluded to something so much greater. That day, the world had lost one of the most brilliant visionaries of all time. Before we go any further, I think it is important to understand who Steve Jobs was and what his role was at Apple. So often he gets called the inventor of the iPhone. While there is some truth in this, it's not entirely accurate. His real talent was his ability to choose a path for the company. He would envision a product and then direct the talent at Apple to execute upon this. He famously said this: "A lot of times, people don't know what they want until you show it to them." It was this mentality that fueled what he did and wanted Apple to accomplish. He wasn't a person to make a product as a reaction to what people wanted. Instead, he set out to fill a void in people's lives that they didn't know they even had. I'd argue that today, over 5 years after the death of Steve Jobs, Apple no longer has this ability. Ultimately, I believe Apple is lost without Steve Jobs. Here's why. What has always set Apple apart is its attention to detail and design. Steve Jobs would get up on stage and say something like this:
"We've designed something wonderful for your hand. Just wonderful."
He wouldn't tolerate bad design or take any compromises. Up until recently, design still seemed to be important to Apple, but as time has gone on, bad design has increasingly crept into Apple products. Other people are noticing this too. Last year, numerous sites ran headlines focusing around this phenomena. Sites like The Verge, Business Insider, Cult of Mac, and many others all took note. Here, I'm going to highlight 3 examples of bad design in recent Apple products. First, let's look at some of Apple's latest accessories. Simply making the Apple Pencil was questionable when you hear a quote like this:
Who wants a stylus? You have to get them and put them away and you lose them. Yuck. Nobody wants a stylus.
However, artists seem to love it, and as a niche product, I think it works. Where it messes up though is how you charge it. It plugs into a lightning connector on the bottom of the iPad Pro. Frankly, it looks ridiculous. I feel like if I used it, I'd accidentally snap the connection or something. Another accessory is Apple's Magic Mouse. It is another example of a terrible way to charge a product. To do so, you have to flip the mouse over and plug in a lightning cable. This means you can't charge the mouse and use it at the same time. This really isn't nitpicking either. On Apple's own website, it has a 3-star rating. Look at the reviews from ordinary people who have bought this mouse complaining about the bad design. Yeah, it's bad. Next up is bad software. At the All Things D conference in 2005, Jobs was asked what it was like to have iTunes on Windows. This was his statement:
We've got cards and letters from lots of people that say that iTunes is their favorite app on Windows. It's like giving a glass of ice water to somebody in hell.
This remark perfectly depicts his pride in Apple's software design. However, if you look at iTunes today on Windows, a Mac, or even iOS, it is a mess. It's not user-intuitive at all, and it's gotten increasingly more complicated over the years. Another example of this is the removal of Slide to Unlock in iOS 10. Slide to Unlock was something that everyone praised. It was really easy to use, it was great, but Apple all of a sudden just decided to ditch it in favor of a new, more confusing way to unlock your iPhone. Lastly, I want to highlight Apple's most recent point of controversy. That is, the removal of the headphone jack. Many people scoffed when Phil Schiller's reasoning for doing so was,
but it really comes down to one word: courage. The courage to move on.
However, I would argue that his statement had some merit. It is understandable to want to push a digital and wireless future. Steve Jobs made plenty of these kinds of decisions in the past. But here's where it breaks down. If Apple was going to have one port, they should have adopted USB Type-C. It is a port that does literally everything. Androids, Chromebooks, Windows, and even Macs have all been adopting it. In fact, on the new MacBook, it is the only port. Apple was even partially involved in inventing USB Type-C. It makes no sense that Apple is currently pushing 2 competing standards across their products. The other reason this push into wireless is premature is how far behind Apple is in the wireless space. Over the past couple years, numerous companies have been quietly adopting Google's casting feature into their speakers and home devices. Meanwhile, Apple has left AirPlay nearly untouched since its launch in 2010. All of this adds up to make the removal of the headphone jack an annoyance instead of a push into a wireless future. Steve Jobs famously said that design is not just what something looks like and feels like. Design is how it works. It's sad that the recent designs don't just work. Even with all of that, the idea that Apple isn't doing well may seem ludicrous to some, especially considering Apple's success for the past 5 years. iPhone sales have never been higher, and as a result, Apple's value has skyrocketed. However, numbers alone don't tell the full story. Apple has gotten to where it has today based on the brand that Steve Jobs created. I think it is important to note that this isn't the first time Apple lost Steve Jobs. In 1985, the company fired him after various internal issues arose. In the 10 years that he was gone, Apple's momentum had decreased tremendously. This is what Michael Moritz had to say about the issue.
After Steve left the company, it lost its compass, lost its mission. It lost its founding spirit. Its products got old and stale, and during that whole period, Microsoft had gotten stronger and stronger.
We're at a point where this could happen again. Google has just entered the ring to directly take on Apple in the hardware and software space with its new Pixel phones. Even Microsoft is attempting to do this in the high-end computer market with their Surface line. Additionally, both Google and Microsoft have been placing huge bets on AI and digital assistants. In comparison, Apple's Siri has remained relatively untouched since its launch on October 4th, 5 years ago. I'm not saying that if Steve Jobs were still alive, Apple wouldn't have any problems. He wasn't perfect, he was human after all. There were some bad products made at Apple when he was in charge. What I am arguing though, is that today Apple isn't innovating as much. They have become increasingly more reactive to the market instead of telling the market what they need. I want Apple to succeed. I want them to once again become a driving force in innovation. However, in order to do that, they will need to stop reacting, stop messing up on design, and instead, they will have to think different like Steve Jobs would have. Thank you all so much for watching. I hope you enjoyed this video. It was a bit nerve-wracking making this my first one just based on the fact that it's going to be controversial. I tried to be as fair as I could both Steve Jobs and Apple, but I know that there's always going to be someone who's going to disagree with me, so if you are one of those people, let me know in the comments down below, and if you liked it, also let me know. I'd love to hear feedback. Anyway, that's all I have to say. I'll see you in the next video. Bye.